Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and welcome to this joint breakfast forum of Westside Economic Alliance and the Clackamas County Business Alliance. I'm Jonathan Schlueter, the Executive Director of Westside Economic Alliance. We are delighted to have you here. To have a capacity crowd in the dog days of August is a remarkable problem to have for any meeting planner, and we welcome this one. We are grateful to be back here in Lake Oswego. It's been 2 years and 1 week since we convened in this room with one of our earlier breakfast forums, and we're very grateful to be back in the West End building. This is a beautiful facility. Some of you were greeted by a coyote out on the grounds as we came in from the parking lot this morning, so we have nature in our neighborhoods. And you will need to be careful in how many croissants you make off with from today's breakfast as you make your way back to the car. But we are drawn together here from diverse backgrounds and from across the geographical region that we represent and serve. We come from both the public and private sectors, from large companies and small. We come from Forest Grove and Cornelius on the west. We come from Vancouver and Portland on the north. We come from Oregon City and Wilsonville on the south, and even from Prineville on the east. So welcome to you all for coming to today's forum. We have a shared commitment to this region. We care deeply about this region, and we give up 2 hours of our lives this morning to come together and talk about the future of our region. We share the commitment to want to build our businesses, to improve our communities, and to raise our families. Today we have about 170 of you in a room that was designated to seat about 150. So we actually had to cap the registration for this event, and for any meeting planner that's a welcome problem to have. I'm not normally in the business of turning away business, but we wanted to make sure that all of you who did pre-register were able to be accommodated. I just want to remind you that with so many people in the room today, we have a lot of cell phones and pagers competing for your time and attention, and while Frontier Communications and Verizon and Comcast are all good dues-paying members, most of the people that you're going to want to visit with and hear from in the next 2 hours are right here in this room. So if you would turn off your cell phones and pagers, I think we would appreciate that. And because we were having to turn some folks away this morning, we are very grateful to have the presence of Tualatin Valley Cable Access Television with us this morning, because that will allow some of you who were able to not get here and attend this morning to be able to hear this later and be able to rebroadcast and hear the comments of our speakers in today's program. And we hope that our organization will be able to link our feed this morning so that you will be able to hear the comments and the questions that were asked this morning on our program to recall what we have learned and what we've discussed here this morning. I'm very privileged at Westside Economic Alliance to work with people around this region and to have the support and participation of the Clackamas County Business Alliance. And as we have planned and prepared for today's program, it's been my great privilege and pleasure to work with Kim Parker, the new Executive Director of the Clackamas County Business Alliance, who will introduce our boards of directors and our elected public officials here this morning. Kim?
Well, if you are a board member of the Clackamas County Business Alliance or the Westside Economic Alliance, would you please stand so we can thank you for your time and service? Stand. Terrific. We also have a number of elected officials in the audience, so I am going to just go down the list here, and as I call your name, if you would please stand, we would like to thank you and recognize you as well. We have State Representative Margaret Doherty, Metro Auditor Suzanne Flynn. I am very pleased to say the entire Clackamas County Commission is here. We've got Chair Charlotte Lehan, Jim Bernard is in the back, I believe. Jamie Damon is over on this side. Ann Leininger, Ann's right here, and then Paul Savis. So thank you all for being here. That's terrific. Very super. We also have Washington County Chairman Andy Dyke, along with Commissioner Dick Schouten. Terrific. With us today are City of Tigard Mayor Craig Dirksen, who is also on the Board of Directors for the Westside Economic Alliance, and his council president, Gretchen Biener. Thank you. We have Mayor of the City of Lake Oswego, where we are today, thank you very much, Jack Hoffman, and where is he? Thank you, and Councilor Jeff Goodman. Terrific. Mayor Keith Mays of Sherwood. Tualatin Mayor Lou Ogden, who's also on the Board of Directors for the Westside Economic Alliance. Forest Grove Mayor Pete Truax. There's Pete. And City of Beaverton Councilors Betty Bodie, Mark Sansui, and Kathy Stanton. Did I say that wrong? Sorry. My apologies. Jonathan tried to help me out here, so I apologize. I got that incorrect. From Senator Jeff Merkley's office, we have John Valley. John, right here. Thank you, John, for being here. And from Senator Ron Wyden's office, we have Jay Ward. Terrific. That's right. Thank you. So with that, I'm going to turn the podium back over to Jonathan, and thank you all again very much for being here this morning.
Thank you, Kim. We have quite a roster of speakers this morning. We're going to start out with Metro Council President Tom Hughes. We will hear from Mr. Hughes and then have questions from you all. So think about what you want to know and the questions that you want to ask of Mr. Hughes up until about the 9 o'clock hour, and then we will switch to our panel of speakers to react and respond to some of what we have learned and talk about the ambitions and needs of some individual communities and the growth of our region. Most of you know that Tom Hughes was elected Metro Council President last November. When he last spoke at our breakfast forum, it was as a candidate for the Metro Council presidency. So we're very pleased to have him back with us. He took office in January, and it has been a busy year for Metro. There is much to talk about in the completion of the urban and rural reserves that were approved by the Land Conservation and Development Commission by a unanimous 6-0 vote a week ago. That is a remarkable accomplishment and achievement for this region and for the Metro Council and for our 3 counties. He has approved and passed the capacity ordinance for our region for the next 20 years. We are now in the process of designating and considering future expansion areas of the urban growth boundary where we grow or don't grow for the next 20 years. So we have much to talk about in a very short time, and I'd ask you to please to welcome Metro Council President Tom Hughes.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. And actually, Jonathan sort of covered it all. So I'll just take questions. I've done a number of these now around the region, and I always am tempted to start. You know, it was a good week here in Lake Wobegon, but that it hasn't been quite that funny. But it has been busy. I had 2 surprises, I think, within the first couple months of coming to office. The first was the weekend after we were all sworn in, a call from then Councilor Robert Liberty saying he was resigning from the council. So we had to start the new service. Councilor Craddock and I, being new to the council, had to start our service by deciding who to select to replace Councilor Liberty in District 6. And I think, as I look back on this year, perhaps the best decision that we made was to find and encourage and eventually appoint former Governor Barbara Roberts to that position. Barbara has been an amazing resource to have on the council, and she is a great colleague, and she has added to what was already a pretty stellar group of folks in terms of concern about the region, intelligence, understanding about fairly complex and detailed issues. And so it's having her on board has been really good, and I'm very pleased with that decision. We were in the midst. The other thing that was supposed to happen before I got there was urban reserves and rural reserves were supposed to be decided. Then Chair Bryan had promised me that he'd have that all taken care of before I had to deal with it. And then, of course, we ran into LCDC, got a little fit of whimsy, and said, well, you almost got it, that there's just this little bit of thing over in Washington County that we'd like to see you fix. So it was back on our plate again. We had negotiated back and forth. Chair Dyke and I had conversations about what we thought our councils, our bodies could each accept in terms of an urban reserve. We had a to put this all sort of in context, we had a meeting, a council meeting where we voted to recommend or to accept Councilor Roberts onto the commission. I left that meeting, went back to a meeting with Chair Dyke and I think Commissioner Rogers and a couple of my counselors, and we sort of got a tentative agreement between the three of us, or the group of us, on a proposal to go forward with, to bring to our bodies in terms of urban reserves. And then on Friday morning, that was Thursday afternoon, so we got all that taken care of on Thursday. Friday morning, went out to Intel, got a chance to help welcome the president to Hillsborough, drove back into town, and Andy Shaw, my chief of staff, said, Michael would like a few minutes of your time if you don't mind. And I thought that sounded kind of ominous. I actually thought maybe I'd done something wrong and I was in trouble, but that's just me. And Michael came in. He said, "Well, you're not going to like that, and like this." And I knew immediately what he was going to tell me because we'd had conversations well before that about the only job he would take outside of Metro was one with the governor, where he basically could help coordinate state government and bring some better sense to the way policy was administered through the executive office after it passed the legislature. And so I knew that meant that he and Governor Kitzhaber had come to an understanding, and that job was forthcoming. So we have now spent a fair amount of time. It was good news and bad news about that. I think everybody here knows Michael and knows that he was his loss to Metro was a pretty serious blow. But the good news about Michael, as in kind of part of the credibility that he had as an administrator, was he had put in place senior administrators that were perfectly capable of keeping the ship afloat and going in the right direction. While we took a little while looking for a COO, one of the things that my colleagues on the council pointed out to me was that back when Michael had been appointed, David Bragdon, my predecessor, was brand new in the job. In fact, it was a brand new job. It had just been created. He was the first elected to it. There weren't a lot of rules and regulations, and so David just sort of came to a council meeting one day and said, "Okay, Michael Jordan's going to be our COO." And they all said, "Yeah, okay, that's fine." And so their point, I think, was we'd never had a discussion about what we wanted in a COO, what we thought that position ought to look like, what kinds of traits and attributes we thought ought to be there. So we had a retreat, and we talked about that a lot, and we laid out a sort of a set of kind of criteria that we look at in terms of candidate. Did a nationwide search, got 56 candidates from literally around the world. I think not surprisingly for those of you who have been around Oregon for a while, the 4 candidates that emerged were all from Oregon. 3 very seasoned city managers from around the state, and an in-house candidate that's already with Metro. And emerged as the 4 finalists. We've now gone through a fairly elaborate process. I suspect they would describe it as grueling, and it now has come down to me. And I think sometime this week I'm going to make a decision as to which of those 4 I'm going to recommend to council to select as COO. The council then gets to decide whether they want to accept that or not, and if they choose not to accept it, then I get to make another recommendation. So it actually comes down, unlike Jerry and my job when I was mayor at Hillsborough, we had to sit around the council and hem and haw about who got to be the city manager. I actually get to decide, and then they get to decide whether I'm right or not. So we'll see how that goes, but I suspect that by the end of this week, I will have made a decision. We'll then vet that internally and with the candidate and probably have a formal recommendation on the meeting at September 8th, which is going to be kind of another one of those landmark decisions or landmark meetings also because we are, I think, on September 8th going to have our final discussion, hopefully, our final discussion at Metro about the Columbia River crossing. We considered something called that we in land use speak refer to as a LUFO, which those of you who don't live and breathe land use planning means land use final order. That is required of all, by Oregon law, of all light rail projects that happen in the state of Oregon, or actually the Portland metro area is the only place where any of them happen. But we have a land use final order that covers the north-south route from all the way from Wilsonville all the way up to the river, and that will now include the light rail going across the Columbia River crossing, the proposed light rail going across the Columbia River crossing. That had to pass before we could move on, and then the second thing that has to pass is a final environmental impact statement. We had a little bit of a quibble with the panel, with the project team about whether or not the final environmental impact statement would include a small fund to mitigate some of the problems created for neighborhoods, particularly in North Portland, created by the actual existence of I-5, which cuts through their neighborhood and creates a number of health and other kinds of issues. And we had asked for a small community mitigation fund to be included in the project, and they had sort of said, yeah, we'll mitigate. And so we said, well, we're going to hold up that final environmental impact statement until we have a chance to talk about that. We've now had a conversation about it. I think we're pretty much satisfied, and probably on the 8th we'll move forward and pass the final environmental impact statement, although it remains to be seen because, as I've learned over the years, you never count something as done until the final vote is announced and you move forward. It'll be nice to have that off the plate. There's some people that come in regularly to talk about Columbia River Crossing that I'm happy to move to some other venue. Margaret, you'll get to deal with them. Well, they come down and tell you what a dumb idea it is. And so, but I think we're moving that project forward slowly. It inches forward a little bit each time. And of course, now that we've taken care of that, now that we've done all of this huge wrestling with each other and angst and going through that thing, now we've got the project to the point where all we have to do now is find the money for it. Well, okay, that's that minor detail. So Congress has to figure out a way to get us the money. The voters in Washington State may have to decide whether they're going to accept tolls. The folks in Vancouver will have two shots at whether or not they're going to do light rail. The Oregon and Washington legislators will have to decide that it's a project worthy of funding, and who knows, perhaps whatever they come up with as a funding source will be referred and have to go to a vote in Oregon. So, it isn't done by a long shot, but it's done as far as we're concerned. It moves beyond us now. So I'm happy that project has moved forward. A couple of other things that I would mention in passing that I think are real reasons to celebrate in the region. One is an ongoing project that I think offers a lot of promise, and some of you in the room have participated in a little bit. It's a program that actually Michael got started about 2 years ago, and he said basically we have this assumption that there are major infrastructure needs around the region that we are not going to find revenue or resources to accomplish. some of those infrastructure needs really enhance or deter our ability to do economic development in the region. And I know in this room in particular that you are sensitive. We just discovered yesterday in listening to Adam Davis, by the way, that the general public is not sensitive, but you are sensitive to the issue of freight mobility and the impact that freight mobility has on our ability to generate jobs in the region. So we need transportation projects, there are water projects, there are sewer projects, and then there's a variety of other things that you could think of in terms of the infrastructure area that we need to find funding for. And maybe and I believe, quite frankly, it's a combination of looking at efficiencies and how many projects do we really need, which of those projects give us the biggest bang for the buck, and then looking at existing revenues and saying, how can we spend those more efficiently? And the example that I use, and no one has told me I'm wrong yet, so I keep saying it, but I don't know a whole lot about brownfield mitigation. We've done a couple of laundries and old service stations out in Hillsborough is about all we've done. I know that Portland has significant brownfield mitigation. They got some projects that are the land that would be available that is in the increasingly more misnamed Superfund category. I've always been intrigued by that name because that almost suggests that there's money. It's a fund, but it's not. It came with burdens and additional legal responsibilities for the property owner, with the idea that there would be funding available. The funding is never followed. Another one of those unfunded mandates. It's interesting because Adam was telling us yesterday that when you ask the general public, the most frequent responses do you know what Superfund means is that, yeah, it's really, really fun. No, that's not quite true. But we know that there are available properties that would add to our land supply that have unique characteristics that would be very attractive to certain job recruitments that we can't handle because they're in Superfund or they're in other brownfield mitigation, and that we need resources applied to brownfield mitigation. One of the things we also that I hear from a lot of folks in the industrial and commercial construction industry is that EPA enforces the Superfund regulations and other regulations around the country, and they do them differently in each region. And the office in Portland administers those regulations much more strictly than they do in several other regions. That strictness adds to the cost of doing brownfield mitigation here over what you would do in other parts of the country. It seems to me that instead of, it's an opportunity to spend political capital rather than fiscal capital in attempting to work through that process and say, how about giving us equity with the rest of the country so that we can actually restore those brownfields to useful purpose at an expense to whoever that's lower than it is now. I use that as an example of just one idea of how we could use the resources we have now more efficiently. I suspect, and I think most of you suspect, that at the end of the day, after we've done all of the efficiencies we can, looked at how we're going to spend our revenues, we're still going to find a gap. And so at some point in time, we have to answer the question, where are we going to get the additional revenues? Michael believed that was a decision, that all of that process was better done in some respects or by the business community. Or at very least that the business community ought to weigh in on that and maybe weigh in on it before the collective governments of the region weighed in on it. And so he created an organization called the Community Investment Initiative. We created a leadership council, and again, several of you in the room are on that leadership council, have lived with this a little bit even more intimately than I have. And they're moving forward now discussing a variety of actions that we can take as a region that would help us make the kinds of investments in infrastructure that we really need in order to make the region supportive of creating jobs. I mentioned the Community Investment Initiative for a couple of reasons. One, it's a process that's moving on, and I'm kind of excited about it. But the other thing is, it's one of a couple of examples that I would suggest to you about where we are moving in this region to think in a more regional fashion. Having done the economic development recruitment part in particular out in Hillsborough for a long time, one of the things, I'm like everybody else. You get competitive, you buy. What do you mean you're going to Gresham? You're supposed to come here. And the reality is that the company that goes to Gresham is a benefit to companies that reside in Hillsborough. And the example that I always love to use is that several of us talked to a Japanese company called Ferrotech for quite a while that manufacture crucibles, and we're looking at a site in Hillsborough so they could be close to Solar World. They thought they were coming over actually to serve Sanyo down in Salem, so they started out looking in Salem, and we kind of pointed to a couple sites up here. They eventually went to Fairview. Hey, Fairview is a lot closer than Norway, which is where Solar World was getting their crucibles before. Solar World is tickled pink. It's jobs on the other side of the region that benefit the jobs that we're creating on this side of the region, and they're perfectly intertwined, intermixed. I'll talk about intertwined in a few minutes. So that economically, we are interrelated. What benefits one part of the region is good for the region as a whole. The other thing about that is we need every part of the region to begin to develop and to prosper. If the region as a whole is going to prosper, we can't leave parts of the region behind. And we need every tool in every local jurisdiction and every part of the region that we have, which is one of the reasons why I get concerned when I look at an area, the movement down in Clackamas County, for example, to refer urban renewal to a vote of the people. Big as I am on public involvement and open transparency, I understand the mechanism of urban renewal enough to know that if you impose that burden in that particular way on urban renewal, you will take that tool away from Clackamas County. And they need it, and we need it as a region because we need them to be successful. We need them to have every tool that they have. So if you've got a place that you want to put some resources this year before we get into the real election cycle, let me recommend that particular campaign that's going to be going on down there, because that's going to be really crucial, I think, to the rest of the region. And we really need to move forward on that. But we need to always begin to think more and more and more as a region rather than as individual communities. Everybody here that is a mayor and a county commissioner does a great job of supporting their local communities, and that's good too. But we also need to begin to think regionally. Tom Ryan used to always say every time somebody says think regionally, it means they want to put their hand on my wallet. And there is some possibilities that that's true, but only for good things, see. So, the other important, I think, development along that line was the merger of Greenlight Greater Portland with the regional partners. So the economic development professionals around the region, most of whom, in fact, all of whom, pretty much work for local governments, have now merged with the organization created by the private sector called Greenlight Greater Portland in a coherent program now to look at how, as a region, public and private, throughout the region, we're going to begin to contest with the other regions in the world that we compete with for getting those jobs. Not just for going out and recruiting companies to come in, that's nice, and it's usually kind of flashy and it's kind of fun, but also to make sure that the companies who are here stay here instead of going someplace else, and that the companies who are here can find markets around the world to sell their products so they can grow. I was always excited about the new companies that came to Hillsborough. I thought that was, Genentech was a great opportunity. Solar World was a great opportunity. I find myself just as excited about a company like Clean Edge. Some of you may have read the thing in the paper the other day about them being on the verge of, they just got $75 million worth of venture capital, and they're on the verge of maybe going public. The thing that I was excited about was that they said they've got 200 jobs in Hillsborough, in the region. The last time I was out there, they had 150. The first time I was out there, they had 5. Those are the kinds of companies that I think we want to encourage, that are local companies that are going to grow. And if we had 20 companies in the region that went from 5 to 200, we'd have a significant job increase, and it would be, in some respects, better than getting the next big one, because the next big one is going to fluctuate based on what the market is for their particular product. So having a broad base for our manufacturing economy is really essential, and we're going to do that as a region. We're not going to do that as independent communities, and we are not going to do it by stealing companies from each other. We're going to do it by making sure that we have land available, that we have a workforce that can handle the job, that we have a regulatory environment that is conducive for businesses, and that we have a good transportation system that can move freight to and from the region. When we do those things, then we'll be successful. And I think that the new Greater Portland, Inc. Is a great step towards thinking about that as a region. I'm happy that that's moving forward. The other thing, we had a interesting discussion from a guy who has put together a park program in Minneapolis, St. Paul, that was really exciting, and also one in St. Louis. In Minneapolis, St. Paul that's almost like trying to put together a park system in Portland. You know, they're very supportive of parks. St. Louis, on the other hand, that's a little bit dicier, and the success he had down there. He had an interesting point that he made when he came and talked to us about a regional park system. He said, it's not about parks, it's not about open space, it's about being a region. All of us who have been at the local level know the kind of pride we take in our local park systems. We either have it now because we have good parks, or we want to have good parks so we can take that kind of pride. But we don't think of that as a regional process. What we've all done at the regional level is we've passed 2 really enormous bond levies to go out and buy open space. We don't have maintenance and operation money designated to maintain all of that space. And I think a lot of cities have, not a lot, but some of the cities have found funding mechanisms to fund the purchase and development of parks, but they have to find other kinds of mechanisms in order to fund maintenance and operations. So one of the things that we're looking at is a network of parks around the region, creating a genuinely regional park network, different than a regional park system, I think, in that we ain't going to own it, but that we will help coordinate it so that you can start at a park in Forest Grove, for example, ride your bike or hike all the way to a park in Vancouver, or Gresham or Wilsonville. And that some of those parks will be metro parks, some of them will be municipal parks, some of them will be county parks. But that mechanism will help bind the region together and give us a sense of pride in something that we're doing as a region. And again, if you don't think that's true, you should talk to the folks in Minneapolis, talk to the folks in St. Louis about the difference that those systems have made in those regions. So I think Intertwine, which is the metro version of that, is going to move forward. We're having ongoing discussions with our partners, and I'm hoping that we can find some funding source so that we can begin to look at the maintenance and operation of those park systems. Those are 3 of the major initiatives that are going forward, I think, in terms of helping us to begin to think much more as a region and act much more as a region. Let me mention just in passing the getting the urban reserves and rural reserves process past LCDC was a great milestone for us, again, as a region. I know that there are people in this room and that are in organizations that jointly wrote an op-ed piece that went in the Oregonian the day that LCDC made their decision. Several of us, including Chair Dyke and former Chair Bryan and former Governor Councilor Roberts, and I went in and talked to the Oregonian editorial board, and I think we got a very favorable editorial out of the Oregonian. All of that contributed to what I think was, importantly, a total 6-0 vote. I think we thought last time, we were surprised that they remanded part of it last time, but last time we thought we were going to get a 4-2 vote. 6-0 is really big, and it will resonate a lot with future lawsuits going into the Court of Appeals in particular. I think it'll be a big help to know that the governing body, who, by the way, wrote the regs that they are now applying, so courts have a tendency to give great deference to that, and I think that this has got a great chance of being a solid slam dunk once it gets into the Court of Appeals. So that will move us forward on, I think, what I know many of us think is not a sufficient land supply, but it sure as heck is going to be a lot better than it would have been under the old mechanism, and we got land we can work with and time down the line to begin to figure out whether we really need to adjust that somewhere after I'm long gone off the scene. So I think, again, we now have coming up by October, we will begin to make our final recommendations on urban growth boundary. My temptation, having again fought these battles from Hillsborough's perspective in the years past, is to refer to it as an urban growth boundary expansion. I understand that there is a possibility that it will not be an expansion, but that's always a possibility. So it's the urban growth boundary decision. I think, again, that Michael set us up really well with a COO recommendation that came out before he left that I think did a couple of things that are important just to mention in passing, that I'm going to open up to questions. One is that we have done done an interesting thing with capacity in the last few urban growth boundary expansions. We've said, well, capacity is easy. You take the number of acres you've got, you multiply it times what the zoning code allows in terms of density, and that gives you your capacity. Most of us know that we've got whole regions whole parts of the region that may not in the next 20 or 50 years live up to their zone densities. The market will not drive downtown Hillsborough as the example I know best. The market currently will not drive the densities allowed in downtown Hillsborough. Clearly, on the east end of the county, Damascus, hard to refer to Damascus as having zone densities because they don't even have a comp plan. But theoretically, if they zoned their densities to what state law sort of requires, that they would have a capacity out there. That's not what the market is telling us is going to happen in the next 20 years. So one of the things that Michael added was a feature that uses market information to modify the capacity study so that we get a realistic version of what our real capacity is, so that we can go forward and begin to say, is that capacity big enough to meet our needs? And I thought that was a great innovation. Like all great innovations, it's not without controversy, has had some challenges, but I think that also will survive. So we're moving forward. By the end of this year, we'll have an urban growth boundary decision, and we will have a number of these other projects off the table, and then I got to figure out what I'm going to do. So let me stop there, and Jonathan, maybe we can turn it open to questions.
Tom, our groups are always interested in the supply of industrial land in our region, and Metro, in selecting the regional industrial land supply, has put conditions on the areas that we designate for future employment use, limiting the commercial developments, limiting schools or institutions from being built in some of the regionally significant industrial areas that we choose. In your work in recruiting businesses to our region, if you find a business that wants to come to our region and build a facility, but also wants to have a company store, needs a daycare center, needs a credit union, in conjunction with their manufacturing activities, should those businesses be allowed, recruited, or sought after in this region?
You know, like a lot of other land use decisions, and particularly broad land use decisions, I think that there has to be a balance struck. I think one of the things that we're discovering about the conditions that were placed on some of the industrial land that came in the last urban growth boundary expansion is that what Metro tried to do was define what high tech was. They said, okay, we're bringing this land in because it's suitable for high tech. We want it to be high-tech. And so they defined what high-tech should be. Well, if you define today what high-tech should be, you're going to be wrong 2 years from now. And so I think we need to avoid that level of specificity in terms of the kinds of conditions we put on land. On the other hand, as I've done recruiting, as we've done expansion, we are not recruiting schools, and we are actually not recruiting mega churches. And so I think that some regulation in terms of what happens on a particular property around what we have generally defined as assembly activities, places where people congregate, like schools and churches, is wise. I really don't think we should be bringing industrial land into the region and then having it absorbed, because industrial land, as some of you may realize, and a lot of the general public doesn't, industrial land is actually cheaper per acre than residential land, or was before the residential market went downhill. And so consequently, there is an economic drive to put those kinds of activities on industrial land, and I think we have to resist that. I don't think an industrial park is a good location for a high school, for example, in most cases. But again, you have to have your regulations and your conditions flexible enough so that it can respond to circumstances. And the problem is, as you know, when you have a condition that Metro has imposed, even if Metro is disposed to remove that condition upon hearing of a particular client that comes to the property, it still delays the process enough that you may lose the deal. And so I would rather see us be more general in terms of our conditions and not impose those kinds of, you can only have a restaurant of 3,000 acres or under. Gets really into the kind of business that I think local governments ought to decide.
Ladies and gentlemen, the time is yours. The microphone is yours for the asking. If you have questions of Tom for the remaining time that we have, you're welcome to ask.
Ann Leininger, one of the Clackamas County Commissioners. I want to ask you a question about, and help educate this group about something really important that you said. On Wednesday, the clerk in Clackamas County certified to the ballot for November a measure that would require the entire population of Clackamas County that votes to vote before the board can create any urban renewal area in the unincorporated part of the county. This would functionally eliminate the tool of urban renewal to finance infrastructure in unincorporated Clackamas County at a time when some of our brightest business minds in the Citizen Investment Initiative are thinking about how we can pay for infrastructure to support jobs and economic development. That is because in Clackamas, the way we pay local match and the way we pay for roads and transportation and sewer systems is through urban renewal areas in unincorporated. It also is how we try to attract businesses like Solo Power, which was interested in Clackamas County in a site in Wilsonville until some folks decided they were concerned about the use of urban renewal to help provide incentives. And so the business, because of the delay and uncertainty of a potential ballot referral, decided to go to Portland instead. Yes, we are integrated economically, but as President Hughes said, if one part of our region really has a reputation of saying no to everything, then that affects other parts of our region too. So we are going to be asking for your help. I, for one, would like to see an alternative measure presented to our community that says voting is good. Voting is particularly good when you ask a relevant, proximate group of people what they think about the community development project at issue. Voting is good when a measure is structured so that there aren't legal problems that would really thwart the ability to do urban renewal, even if everybody liked it. We're going to need to ask for your help educating our community. I know you and I have talked about an incredible project, an urban renewal area in the Hillsborough area. I'd love you to highlight that if you don't mind, because I think it shows how much creating great jobs can hinge on the appropriate, reasonable use of urban renewal. Thanks.
I don't get that back. I get my own. Well, and I think the project that you and I had a conversation about was Ronler Acres, and a lot of people are familiar with Ronler Acres in general. I used to love to go to the legislature when the opponents of urban renewal used to go before the legislature and ask for legal legislative measures to end urban renewal as an effective tool. They used to always paint a picture of urban renewal as always taking away resources, sucking up money out of special districts and other things that needed the money in order to address ongoing issues, and in a way that was not helpful to build the community. Ronler Acres, well, I used to love to tell the story of Ronler Acres. Those of you that don't know, Ronler Acres was about a 500-acre failed subdivision. It was the Oregon's version of a Florida land scam. Guy had platted the development and sold them at county fairs all around the country, and then when he couldn't get septic approval, took the money and went to Brazil. And so it sat there for the better part of 40 years. And nobody could do anything with it. Pac Trust had tried 2 or 3 times, and what they ran into, of course, was every time they went to the third property owner, they'd get the first 2 property owners to sell them the property. The third property owner would say, "Oh no, I know what you're going to do. I would like, like instead of $3,000 or $4,000, I like $150,000 for my lot." And all of a sudden, the price would go to the point they couldn't pencil anything out. So they came to City Hillsborough and said, "Isn't there anything you could do?" We created an urban renewal district in the Ronler Acres area, froze the property tax values on the rolls at that point in time at $8 million, which was approximate value of those properties collectively. During the course of the next 9.5 years, we did $36 million worth of public improvements, including most of the roads and infrastructure that was needed to serve that particular area. At the end of that period of time, replotted it into industrial and mixed use. And at the end of the 9.5 years, we rolled $640 million back of property value back onto the rolls. Everybody benefited from that. By the way, the northern 2/3 of the property sold to a little company that was coming up from Santa Clara that wanted some expansion room. And they have, subsequent to that, invested about $12 billion on the site, and they have about 12,000 employees that work there. The southern third of it became a development called Orenco Station. Some of you may have heard of that. It wins awards. I think 2 years ago it won a Sunset Magazine recognition as one of the outstanding urban developments, or suburban developments in the western United States still, and it's been that old. Those are the kinds of things that are possible with judicious use of urban renewal. I quite frankly think the Solar Power project would have been a similar kind of a story, somewhat smaller, but a similar kind of story. It was disappointing that the political forces down there were unable to pull that off. I think that would have been a great opportunity. Urban renewal is difficult to explain, and it is particularly difficult to explain if it has no relevance to you. So from Lake Oswego voting on an urban renewal district outside of Molalla is kind of like, so why would they care? And I think that's, I do think that removes, it removes a tool that Clackamas County really needs in order to be able to develop. Chair.
Yes. Am I on? I just wanted to follow up on this, kind of the political landscape. This is something of an extreme political group that is pressing this forward, but want to impress upon you that they don't intend to stop here. Their intention then, this current measure affects unincorporated and Clackamas County and not our cities, but their intention is to then go after the cities and limit urban renewal use in the cities in a similar fashion. And I can tell you as a former mayor of Wilsonville that there are very few major developments in Wilsonville that we could have done without urban renewal. Villebois wouldn't have happened. The Fred Meyers that just opened wouldn't have happened. Menor Graphics wouldn't be there, and all of those businesses around there. Urban renewal is the tool that made Wilsonville develop at the pace that it did over the last 20 years. And And for Clackamas County especially, urban renewal is really the only tool we have rattling around in that box. And it's extremely critical to our future, but also, as you all point out, to the region's future, because most of that infrastructure money goes to transportation projects. And transportation for this region is tied up on I-5, I-205, and the major freight arterials that run through Clackamas County. So it is in everybody's interest that we not lose this, the ability to use urban renewal, and if it's and have it be a local vote instead of a county-wide vote, which effectively kills urban renewal from here on out. So just wanted to note that it's not just Clackamas County that's impacted here.
Right. It's a return to Oregon politics of Lauren Park, whom some of you grew to know and love when he was Bill Sizemore's money man.
Time for one more question, please.
Good morning, Tom. Thanks for being here.
Good morning. Thank you.
As a resident who lives on the east side of the Willamette River in the vicinity of the Selwood Bridge, and apologies if it sounds like I'm piling on questions about the math abilities of Clackamas County residents, which really I know isn't our subject today. But I went to several, I want to ask you a question as a Metro leader about how we manage bridges as part of the regional equation. But I went to several workshops about the Selwood Bridge where I was asked if I preferred a 60-foot wide bridge or a 54-foot wide bridge or whatever. I was like, I don't know, I'm basically a citizen. You tell me what the functionality is of these things. And there was very little in those workshops that was on the subject of why do we all need to have a properly functioning bridge that accommodates these modes? And if there's a failure occurring in the whole communication, it's about the proportions, where the voter attitude of, well, why should I have to pay for something that I don't use? Well, the few cents that comes out of your wallet contributes to a regional economy that is worth literally billions along the lines you just outlined. I don't think we're doing a good job of getting that communication deeply into our communities as we could do. All of which we can say back to the subject of how we manage regional infrastructure, and in particular bridges in this instance.
Well, and bridges have sort of caught our attention on several levels. The Selwood Bridge, because pieces of it keep dropping into the Willamette River. And the CRC, because particularly this last summer with high water, it seems to go up about every 3 hours. And that usually causes about a 4-hour traffic jam. So, they become a choke point. There are other regional facilities that have regional importance that are equally challenged. I'm thinking about my drive back to Hillsborough on 217 this morning. It kind of pops into my mind just for a second as maybe one of those facilities that does the same thing. I think we probably need, and it may be part of the answer that we come up with in the Community Investment Initiative, but we do need to look at how we're going to invest in regional transportation facilities, whether they be bridges or stretches of highway or what they are. And it needs, we need to really kind of come to grips with that. Again, as a region, I think, because, otherwise, I love this, the comment of the people kept making was, I never use the Selwood Bridge anyway. Maybe if we shut it down for a while, then we really would find out who wanted to use it and who needed to use it. But that's a little dramatic, I guess. The other thing, though, I think is a friend of mine teaches out of taught out of Pacific University. He's emeritus now, like a lot of my friends. The ones that had the good sense to retire are now all emeritus. But he used to talk to his classes about the different modes that we find ourselves in as citizens. That sometimes we feel ourselves as members of a community, and sometimes we think of ourselves as taxpayers. And to the degree that we think of ourselves as a community, we ask ourselves the question, is this good for the community? Does this move us forward when we're asked, particularly a money measure? If we think of ourselves as a taxpayer, we tend to say, does this benefit me directly? And where we are right now, I think, unfortunately, and listen to Adam Davis yesterday reinforced that, is the bulk of our citizenry have come to think of themselves as taxpayers. I think part of that is that we've had so many brutal battles recently over taxes, that people have begun to kind of do that calculus. I think it's because of the economy, a whole bunch of other reasons. We really need to build in this region and hopefully even around the country a better sense of belonging to a community of interests, and the question of how do we move forward that community of interests. So it begins to make sense to somebody that if it benefits the region, it ultimately benefits me. And maybe not as direct, maybe not as straightforward as I would like, but it ultimately benefits me. So that if I'm out in Hillsborough, which I am, by the way, and I'm asked to pay taxes to support something in Gresham, or something in Wood Village, or something in Wilsonville, or something in Lake Oswego, that I don't say, why would I bother with those people? That I say, this is good for the region, and we really need to work on this together. And I think that the more all of us, business leaders, government leaders, begin to think in terms of ourselves as a region and talk to our citizens about that regional kind of attitude, the quicker we're going to get people into the mode of saying, we're going to have differences of opinion around the region. There's pockets of support for different kinds of programs. There's ways they can finance that at the local level and don't have to tap into regional resources. But there's stuff we can only do as a region. And I am convinced of two things. The federal government is not going to bail us out. The state government is broke. Whatever we do, we're going to do here. And I don't think we can afford to do it community by community by community. We're going to have to do it on a regional initiative. And the region that does that, and I like to think it's going to be this region, is going to prosper. We're going to be better competing with other regions around the world, and we will prosper in a way that other regions that can't get their act together and do that will not. So we better be the region that does that, quite frankly. And I'm hoping that we can move forward on that. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I know that there are more questions and more issues that you would like to discuss, but time is short. But I think you'll agree after a presentation like that and the subjects that Mr. Hughes has been engaged in for the past year in his inaugural year as your Metro Council president, we are being very well represented and very well served in the Metro Council. We certainly thank you for your service, Tom, and we thank you for that presentation. We'd like to switch gears here at this point and talk about how these programs and policies affect our region in various portions of the region. And we're very pleased to have with us the Executive Director of the Port of Portland, Bill Wyatt. Bill has been in this position since 2001. He served as the Chief of Staff to Oregon Governor John Kitzhaber for 7 years, and preceded by 6 years as the President of the Oregon Business Council and 5 years as Executive Director of the Association of Portland Progress, which was the Portland Downtown Development Association at that time. Bill also served as a state representative from the Astoria area between 1974 and 1977. He is a very active and important member of Westside Economic Alliance. We are grateful to have his participation in today's program, and we welcome his opportunity to speak to us about the activities of the Port of Portland in the industrial land supply of our region. Welcome, Bill.
Morning, everybody, and Jonathan, thank you very much. And I always like to be identified as having been born and raised in Astoria, and I think this morning it's a kind of a useful little metaphor. It's a fabulous community. It's growing up there, it was drilled into me that it's the oldest continuous settlement west of the Mississippi River, which is a fact. But it's also a community that has spent 50 years in the wilderness, undergoing a pretty remarkable economic transformation, but one brought on by change. Change in federal timber policy and state timber policy, change in the fishing industry, and it has taken all of 50 years for that community to really find itself. And I think it's just a nice little reminder for all of us that could be us here. We could be on the edge of a transformational period, which might not be a happy one. And I think the debate that we're having today in this region about industrial land is particularly important. So let me just say a couple of things about our organization. Most people think about the port either as the owner and the operator of the airport, which is true, or the owner-operator of several of the marine terminals on the Willamette and the Columbia River, which is also true. We have a long history here in Portland. The port's been around since 1891, and I would say we are as much the port at Portland as we are the port of Portland. We're a municipal subdivision of the state, and we are really a gateway in that respect. So we have cargoes that come from all parts of the country that are destined out of the Columbia River and sometimes in to various points hither and yon, a major supplier of industrial land. And that's something that not as many people are aware of. Rivergate, Swan Island, now the Troutdale Reynolds Industrial Park. And there will be more news to come. We're acquisitive. We're going to buy more industrial land. We're not going to be competing with the private sector. Nobody's going to accuse us of having competed with the private sector to acquire the former Alcoa Reynolds aluminum plant site. There were no private developers really available for that. Nobody was going to take on a Superfund site that was not then annexed to the city of Troutdale and provide the services required. And you know, if we look at what's there now, we have 250 acres remaining. There are 700 people gainfully employed, $130 million on the Troutdale tax rolls as a result of this, and we intend to do more so that we can be certain that the limited supply of industrial property that is available, large lot, is used for its intended purpose. So more to come on that story, and we intend to be very active and very engaged in that space. I want to just add a couple of dimensions, I think, to this debate about industrial land supply. First, we should, in my opinion, really focus that incredibly valuable resource of large lot industrial land on traded sector companies. And traded sector activity to the greatest extent that we can, because this is a region that is trading oriented. The Portland metropolitan area, for example, I think is the second most trade-dependent metro area in the country. Many people are surprised to hear that, but that's a fact. And that is going to continue to be the case. The United States is going to continue to rely heavily on exports, even more so as places like China and India develop rapidly and are unable to provide for themselves everything that their rapidly growing middle classes demand. And so trade will continue to be extremely important. I think a significant part of our regional gross product here is developed as a direct result of trade. Traded sector. Secondly, there is a lot of talk in this region and Oregon about small business, and I think that's great because we have a lot of tenants who are small businesses. And it is true that small businesses do generate the bulk of the job growth here. But I think the mistake in this debate is this. Nobody, I'm assuming, we don't go to the store and buy small business, right? We buy things, we buy services. The small businesses who provide those things and those services very often are directly related or indirectly related in one way or another to some large, more traded sector company, somebody like an Intel, for example, or even Nike, which, believe it or not, does manufacture something here and export it, the air soles, which are then sent to their various factories around the world. Large companies, the big companies, over 500 in employment, are the actual core of the traded sector economy here. And so small businesses are vendors to, are suppliers of those larger businesses. Yes, that's where the growth is, to be sure, but without those large traded sector companies, we're not going to see the robust kind of small business growth that we want. So let's not lose sight of that. And when people talk about small business as the backbone of our economy, they are true. It's just not the whole story. The whole story is that they depend in very large measure on the existence of large companies who themselves require these large lots. They require the infrastructure that has been so much a part of the conversation this morning. Now, secondly, and I think this is a very relevant topic for the decision that Metro has in front of it related to land supply, industrial land supply. What's industrial land? How much of it do we really have? And there is not today a consensus about how much industrial land this region has. We can tell you how much is zoned industrial, but how much of it is really ready to stick a shovel in the ground and provide whatever infrastructure is required in order to develop. Because here's what I never have happen to me as an owner of, representing an owner of a lot of the large lot industrial land in our region. I never have somebody come in and say, hey, don't worry, I've got 10 or 15 years to hang around. So, if you can get the road built, that's fine. We'll be there when the time's ready. Just give us a ring. No, people who are making these enormous decisions need to know now. And the pace, the timeline is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. Which means that our requirement as a region to provide parcels that are really ready to go is vital. Now, Metro would tell you, and I'll just toot our own horn for a minute, that on West Hayden Island, okay, which is the other side of the fun part of the island, which we own, there are 425 acres of industrial land. Oh. Really? You mean we're ready to go? Oh, no. We get to annex it first, very important. It's within the UGB. It was brought in the UGB by Metro in order to serve maritime industrial purposes. So, okay. Well, so the city says it's not 425 acres, it's 300. And by the way, you're going to spend $3 or $4 million in planning and in permitting. And at the end of all that, we may decide yes, we may decide no. That is the largest single parcel, I believe, remaining inside the urban growth boundary and is the basis, a very important basis for Metro's determination in how many acres to bring inside the urban growth boundary. And it is not the only parcel of its kind in our region. And so that's, I guess, the nub of my point. We have to get very clear with ourselves as a region about what is industrial land and what isn't. And just calling it industrial land isn't enough. Now, reference was made to the earlier decision of Metro a few years ago on the urban growth boundary and the industrial land they brought in, and I think this is the other really key point. To be blunt, an awful lot of the industrial land that was brought in last time around was sited in areas without any infrastructure whatsoever. And we're now awakening to the fact, oh, gee, got to have roads, got to have pipes, got to have bridges, got to have whatever. And they're all knocking on our doors now. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? Well, how about if we get smarter this time and put industrial land adjacent to infrastructure? It's out there. You know it's out there. It's available. It can be done. And let's try a little less engineering on this front and a little more common sense and site industrial land next to capable and existing infrastructure, because it's very possible to do. It may not always be the politically acceptable or the easiest choice to make, but it's an awful lot better than going back out to our citizens and saying, listen, we put this helicopter industrial district out here where it has no access to any available infrastructure, and we'd like you to pay for the road, to pay for all the infrastructure to connect it. And I think not likely going to happen. I'm getting the flag back here. So key point, traded sector, really important. Don't mistake the small business phenomena related to large businesses. And finally, let's get really clear about what we mean by industrial land and make sure that when we call it industrial land, we're ready to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. We're going to hear from the rest of our speakers, and then we will ask them all to take the podium up here, or the dais up here, so that we can ask questions of each of them as a group when the program is finished. But our next speaker will bring this down to the local level. Our Mayor, Tim Knapp, from the city of Wilsonville, has served on the city council since 2003 and was elected to be the town's mayor in 2009. He is currently involved in the Metro Joint Policy Advisory Committee on Transportation, JPAC, and has served on the Metro Policy Advisory Committee, MPAC. Also active in the Urban Rural Reserve Steering Committee and the Wilsonville Development Review. Tim has lived in Wilsonville community for 25 years. He's a business owner and the dad of 2 children. Would you welcome, please, Mayor Tim Knapp.
Thank you, Jonathan, and good morning. Yes, we have a local view on a lot of this and a short time slot here, and there's a lot to talk about, so I'm going to jump right into it. First of all, in terms of UGB expansion, I think we need to talk about the context for that expansion. In Wilsonville, we have a very high growth rate. From 1990 to 2000, we grew from 7,000 people to 14,000 people, almost 100%. Over the most recent 10 years, we grew to nearly 20,000, another 40% increase. Location remains key, our location along the highway corridor for both residents and businesses. An employment snapshot shows about 15,000 employees. Actually, we're down about 1,500 employees in the last couple of years during the downturn. Most of our jobs are either in the manufacturing area, high-tech manufacturing, or wholesale distribution. Wilsonville's total payroll at this point is $800 million. Apply a multiplier effect, and it's pretty significant on the region. Our major businesses include Xerox, Mentor Graphics, Tyco, Cisco Food Services, Rockwell Collins, and FLIR. Our workforce, however, is a commuting workforce. 1 out of every 10 jobs in Wilsonville is filled by a local resident. 9 of 10 commute in. 1/3 come from the city of Portland. 10% come from Beaverton. The balance come from various communities throughout the metro area and the North Willamette Valley.